Richa Sharma, and today we are talking to Dr. Shwetank Bansal, who is consultant psychiatrist at BLK Super Speciality Hospital and Better Me Healthcare. It's good to have you here, Dr. Bansal.
Thanks for having me, Richa.
So today, because it's Independence Day, so we thought about talking about different forms of freedom that exist and how it's important, especially for our mental and emotional well-being, to be able to access those forms of freedom. So what do you have to say about this? Why is freedom an important concept for our psychological and emotional well-being?
You know, when I start to think of freedom, I just recall this quote that, freedom is somewhat like the air, that we don't really think about it, doesn't seem to matter so much until it's not there. That's when it starts mattering. That's when we start to think about it. So, if we look at if we look at how important freedom is, we will just need to look at how disruptive the lack of it can be.
Right. And could you give me some specific examples, in our, say, personal, interpersonal, social, or in these times, even political space, where have that lack of freedom interferes with that sense of well-being?
Well, I think everyone has encountered some amount of their freedom being obstructed at one point of time or the other. It could be in school, when you want to have lunch and the bell just doesn't go off, where you are tied to that schedule that's been made for you. It could be at work. It could be at home where you want to spend your time a particular way, but you're not allowed to. It could be about exercising your voice, exercising your sexual orientation, about your sexuality. It's something that has often been obstructed in our country as well. It could be your political freedom. And we start from the smallest to the largest of themes, and there are examples all around of freedom being obstructed.
So that, I was just recently rereading this book by Amartya Sen called Development is Freedom, in which, the sense of human well-being is multifaceted, and it's like when people are not excelling in their socio-economic or personal spaces, it's also in a way curtailing their development and curtailing their freedom to participate in society. So being a mental health professional, I want to ask you, in what ways does having a mental health condition curtail freedom for people? In what domains? Yeah.
At a very core level, since it's a mental health condition, it affects one's thinking. It affects the way one feels. So it's hitting your freedom at a very, very core level. The freedom to have a particular perspective unencumbered by these sort of distortions. And that's why it can be very, very fundamental in the way it obstructs a person's development and growth. When we look at a smoke screen affecting how one ends up perceiving the world or perceiving themselves, that's one of the biggest obstructions to freedom one can imagine.
And when we talk about everyday sphere in life, just activities of everyday living or things that people take for granted, just like you said, it's like air, we just take it for granted. It's all around us. So in those domains, what are some of those liberties that people take for granted but are curtailed for people with mental health conditions?
It varies a lot depending on what mental health condition we're talking about, but it could affect something as simple as enjoying your favorite movie, to planning to study abroad or to take on a new profession, making a jump in your career, to having a partner. It can affect all of those liberties or things that we otherwise take for granted. Mental health conditions, psychological problems can create big barriers in all of those things. If we look at a simple thing such as speaking out about something you have, mental health conditions have long been affected by that shroud of stigma that has been around, where people are at a disadvantage when they talk about it, where they can actually expect to be ostracized when they talk about what's already affecting them, just to add insult to injury. It's something that's undergoing change as we speak right now, with more and more people in prominent people coming out with the sort of conditions that they've been suffering from, and that serves to normalize it a little bit. But it's largely been seen as, something that happens to others till
Right.
now. We don't recognize the fact that it happens to us and not others. Anyone can get affected by it. So that is a very, very core level of freedom that's been affected, and that's not even a direct result of the mental health condition. It's a direct result of the interface of the mental health condition with the society, and it's the societal mindset that is currently undergoing the change. But there is far more progress to be made in that direction, so as to facilitate a person simply talking about the fact that so and so is getting affected by this particular problem, and therefore, and that's a starting point. All of the other freedoms lie, on a path ahead from there.
And that's a very interesting point you made, because even the worldwide literature, or if you read theories about it, so it's not the impairment per se that creates a disability or creates a disorder. It's always the interaction of that impairment, or that diversity that exists with a social environment which is not that accommodating of that diversity, which creates the impairment. So stemming from this, I would like to ask you then, and also because you've interacted with, with all these years of experience, you've interacted with so many people with mental health conditions, what are some of those, points of freedom that they would want to ask from the society, or from their family members or peers, or the larger structures in the society?
I think the crucial freedom that I think everyone that I meet would want to ask for is the freedom to be, and to be unapologetically
Mm,
who they are, to not be accused of creating the problem that they have.
mm,
A double victimization of sorts that
mm,
unfortunately a lot of them are subjected to. Um, the freedom to exercise choice in treatment,
mm,
the freedom to exercise what they want to do with it, how they want to carry it out, what are the life choices they make. Often, especially in the Indian society, we see that uh, people who talk in their immediate society, meaning the family or the extended society, could be their peer group, etc. When they talk about a certain problem that they've been facing, let's say they talk about something like anxiety, as common as anxiety disorder, um, there are a lot of people questioning other choices that they're making.
right,
And suddenly there's a question mark, and that adds to the stigma. That also is an invisible force that's obstructing people from talking about what they're actually feeling.
right,
So, a freedom to exercise those choices, well understanding that they might have, negative effects, just like they have for anyone.
right,
You're not more prone or less prone just because you have a particular disorder. So, the freedom to have other people understand that, the freedom to choose.
right,
Um, from something as core as simple as that to the freedom of choosing a partner, of having the partner know that there's a problem there, and having the partner be a party to treatment.
right,
It's a choice that very few people are able to exercise. But a good development is that more and more people are exercising the choices. I have lots of clients coming in before they're about to get married. All of these pandemic weddings that are happening right now.
right,
A lot of clients coming in online with their partners, and sometimes the partners are located in a different city, and they want to know about what is it that their partner's up against, and how they can be an ally in the treatment process. So that is a far deviation from what used to be a decade or 2 decades ago.
all right. So there's just one more, thing that I want to ask about. It's about making mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, and people who don't have mental health conditions, we are generally more accommodative of their mistakes. But when it comes to people who have mental health conditions, even one mistake is, magnified, and it's all of it is attributed to their condition. So what do you have to say about that?
Absolutely, I think that's one crucial factor, and funnily enough, it's not just about the onlooker attributing the mistake to the mental health condition. It's also the person themselves. attributing the mistake they've made to their mental health condition. And so often you'd get a situation where, let's say, in the middle of a pandemic, someone's just not being able to get by. They're having a lot of trouble getting their schedule together. They're having trouble getting their tasks fulfilled. And while we know that a lot of people have gone through the same thing in the middle of the pandemic, someone with a history of depression is likely to attribute this dysfunction to their depression and not to the fact that there's a pandemic there. So there is that attribution both at the level of the self as well as the level of the other. And changing in terms of both is what's actually needed. So, and there has to be a freedom to make mistakes as well. How else does one learn if one can't make mistakes?
And also, and this is something from my training during MPhil, mistakes also during the treatment process. People can sometimes maybe fall back on the treatment regimes and then learn from that and come back. But with people with mental health conditions, I think it's almost like, it's very strict. People, their treating teams sometimes tend to get very strict and very reductionist. That if one mistake made is a fatal mistake, and then that's a label that that person has to carry with, okay, that this person relapses or this person does not comply with his or her medication. So I mean, that space does not exist. And I think that space needs to exist for informed consent to happen. I mean, how else will informed consent even be practiced?
I absolutely agree that sometimes the treating team inadvertently, perhaps at times, is also guilty of stereotyping the client that they're looking after. We've seen it so many times with people with bipolar. We've seen it with people who have borderline personality disorder, that they just get typecast into a certain box. And there, I think freedom from that box also becomes important, both for the treating team and for the person who's being put into that box.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So this brings me to my final question about the general kind of freedom that should exist, again, in people's inner selves, inner lives, in their interactions with others, in interaction with society, which is preventive and which is protective from the incidence of a mental disorder, which will protect them from that happening.
I think if you look at the opposite of freedom, if you look at um, if you look at subjugation, exploitation, when we look at the extreme absence of freedom, is when we get a window into the sort of problems that can arise from just the absence of freedom. But it's a continuum, and that while that extreme, stark reality of the opposite extreme is something that's visible to everyone, it's the middle portions that get blurred out of. But we need to perhaps look at the fact that when we look at a continuum that stretches from freedom, complete absolute freedom, to absolute absence of freedom, it's here that we're seeing a lot of mental health complications.
Right.
So it's going to be very naive to think that if on this continuum you lie somewhere here, there will not be any mental health complications.
Absolutely.
As we move from this point to this one, mental health complications are obviously increasing. They might not be visible in that stark a manner. They might not be visible so readily. You might need to perhaps dig deep a little bit to come out with what's happening. But there's something absolutely happening there. And this could span from um, this can span from the common when we talk about a depressive illness or an anxiety related condition to more serious mental illnesses as well, and to personality disorders if this is happening at when the right time for this example but the wrong time for the person, right? So if it's happening at the wrong time, it could even eventually evolve into a personality disorder.
Right. And like as a woman and seeing as the kind of freedoms that are curtailed for women, especially in this country, I think that leads to a lot of incidents of mental health conditions, in a lot, still in a lot of households, women are not allowed to go out, not allowed to interact, or even if they're going out for the same work, they're not being paid equal wages. So I think all of that is important. And for me, I think that is the kind of freedom that I would seek on this Independence Day, just to be treated fairly. So, right. So if there's just one, last concluding remark that you'd like to make, what would that be?
Well, I'd just like to remark that we're often more alive to the concept of freedom when it comes to our own selves.
Mm,
But when it comes to the freedom of people around us, we're
mm,
not that enlightened somehow. So, uh, the parting remark from my side would just be to try and just, walk a bit in the other person's shoes, and you'll probably realize how you could contribute to helping them towards freedom a little bit more.
amazing. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for your time. I look forward to interacting with you again.
Thank you, Richa. Always a pleasure talking to you.